It's the start of the close season now, and my quest for a big Stour Roach in the 2021 season is all over. I've done half a dozen programs over the last few months, and they've been quite popular, and I think people have enjoyed them. It's been a funny season on the Stour for roach for me. I've fished other waters, so I haven't always fished the Stour. I had 10 sessions on the Avon back in the summer and early autumn. Fished a local still water a great deal this season. That was hard going, but it was quite local. Even caught a £2 roach out of there, which was a bit of a bonus. Didn't quite expect that. I knew the big hybrids were in there, and I kept catching the same hybrids over and over again. And a few good rudd as well, but eventually I started to get some much bigger roach. I was getting ones of 12 ounces to a pound quite regularly, and in the end I caught one or two better roach, like I say, 1.5, 1.10 and eventually 2.2. On the Stour, it's been a funny year in as much as the lockdown that came in the new year really restricted where I could fish on the Stour. To comply with the guidelines, supposedly, whatever they are, I needed to fish locally, and the most local stretch by a good way was the stretch at Wimborne. So from January onwards, that's where I fished, January through till March the 14th. Back in January, the river was quite unsettled. I didn't really fish it much at all that month. But then in February the river settled, we had some good conditions, and the same into March, although it became a bit more difficult then, got clearer, and I found the way around that was to fish in the evenings, which was quite good. The season before, 2019-20 season, I had the most roach I've ever had at the Stour in a season, which was 1100. I've had 1000 before, 900 before, but that previous season quite a lot of good catches of especially at Wimborne, of 60, 70, even 90 odd roach in quite short sessions of 3 or 4 hours at the most. And it was interesting to wonder whether that would continue into last winter, but it wasn't to be. I still fish my short sessions, so I don't go down there for 9 hours or anything like that. Still fish for around about 3 hours generally, occasionally a shorter session, very occasionally 3.5 to 4 hours. And the most sort of fish I was getting last season was around about 40 odd, so down a bit. The cormorants are still hitting it very hard on the Stour generally. They were evident time and time again, anything up to 6 to 8 cormorants. Lots of the roach are scarred up with cormorant damage. And there's no doubt they're taking their toll on the numbers of roach in the stretch. What was promising is that the proportion of ones over a pound I caught over the whole season on the Stour was definitely up on the previous season, which was better than the season before that, and most definitely the season before that, when I could hardly get, I think I had one season didn't get any over a pound at all, which was a bit worrying. But the season before last I had over 20, and this time I had nearly 30. And I just fish for roach. I fish in a way that I hope for better ones. I don't worry too much about just catching big ones, but it's nice to get ones that need a landing net. And my mantra of, if I go roach fishing, get half a dozen roach, and one of them's a good half a pound, in other words a netter, that's a good start. And plenty of the catches were much better than that. Sometimes I had, I think the most I had was 5 over a pound. I didn't get a £2 last season out of the Stour. I don't regard that as failure, but I did get one or two good fish. I had a 114 back in the summer, totally out of the blue. I was fishing a swim, filming it on the Stour further down from Wimborne, and I had a bit of trouble with a jack pike that took a fish. And I had about half an hour left. That swim had gone dead, and I found another swim that was quite narrow. I couldn't get the cameras running. It was too narrow really to get a view of what was going on. Straight away I caught some nice dace, And then I started to pick up one or two nice roach, including netters, and it was almost time to go home when I hit a much better roach, and that proved to be 114. Last winter I didn't do quite that well. I did get a 112 from a swim that was new to me, and that was promising. I had one or two others over £1.50 at Wimborne. There were ones caught over £2 on that stretch, not from the areas I fished. There's about a mile of river altogether there that's fishable in the winter. And obviously some anglers concentrate on certain swims. Some of the swims I featured in my videos around Christmas became very popular and hammered, and probably went into decline as swims. People need to wake up to the idea, if you do get big catches and put them in keep nets, your fishing will quickly go downhill. You won't get big catches for very long. You might get away with it once, but that's it. But if you don't use a net, you can keep going back and catching plenty of roach. It's a lesson that people need to learn, but there you are. A tough one for some to accept. And I would ask, do you really need to see your net of roach at the end of the day? I don't think it matters. If I can make a video without a keep net, I'm sure it's possible to see what you've caught. Just photograph the best fish and reflect on those when you get home. Some of the stretches that I couldn't get to, it's hard to know how well they fished. Again, people were restricted to being very local. So in a normal winter, I might have gone up to Sturminster Newton. I think the floods affected it far worse than further down at Wimborne. Wimborne's a big, deep, slow bit of river most of the time. And so when the river's up 4 or 5 feet at Sturminster, you can fish at Wimborne when it's up less than a foot and it's fishable. Whereas at Sturminster, it would just be horrible and brown. And it loses that colour as it comes down the river. It's the very clear streams like the Tarrant, the Allen, the Winterbourne and the Ewan all come in, very clear rivers, and they knock the colour out of the river as it comes down, so it becomes a nice colour at Wimborne most of the time. If you get a big dirty flood coming down, it's horrible, but quite often it's quite good there. And often when Sturminster's the perfect colour and fined right down, that means it's probably too clear at Wimborne. Further down around Parley, Muscliffe, the free water on the other side to Parley, I suspect it got fished very heavily this winter. I think it was a bit high in February. It's a shallower stretch than Wimborne, not as wide, and it really does push through when the river's fairly high. I suspect some big roach did come out of there. Throup's the same. It's much more of a summer and autumn river than a winter one. Doesn't mean the big ones don't come out, but you don't get the roach fishing that you get in the summer. Back last summer I did fish Throup a bit with hempen tears. It was an okay summer. I won't say it was brilliant. I had some better roach, one of 1.9, several others just over £1. Caught some good roach from swims I hadn't fished for quite a few years. Some of the swims I favour were very weedy. I think the weed cutting regime varies from year to year. There's no set pattern to it, and it's a matter of potluck on what happens. And sometimes too little weed in certain places means a swim can be too shallow and the roach don't hold in it. So I have to wait and see what happens next year. I want to make more videos about roach fishing on the Stour next season, next summer and autumn and winter. Try different things, hopefully without the restrictions we've had this year. I did, as I say, get onto the Avon last summer and autumn. It was interesting. I didn't catch a huge number of roach, a couple of dozen. Didn't always catch any roach at all. Some days it was more a case of fishing for dace and small chub. Even had one or two little barbel. And it's not a place that I'm particularly bothered about fishing in the winter. It's the sort of water that you need to put a lot of time in and make the effort, and I don't have the time to go and spend all day every day doing that. I think it's a place to fish a lot. If you live somewhere like Burton or Christchurch, then that's fair play, but not when I have to travel a fair way for it. And of course this year it was pretty much beyond my local reach, shall we say, since Christmas. Other things I've learned, I've tried different match rods over the winter for my roach fishing at Wimborne. I still prefer my John Allerton Tricast Premier match rod, a 13 foot with a splice tip, superb rod. I did try some of my old Normarks, all of them are good rods, all up to the job. I was lent a Colmic 14 foot rod, a little bit on the light side for the big floats, but a very forgiving rod. And when I compared it to a Microlite 2, which extends to a 14 foot, you could hardly tell the difference between the two rods, which was interesting, and I think it's a little bit light. I did go up a float size or two. The usual floats I was using were about 4.5 grams and went up to nearer 6 grams. That worked well. Stuck to my barbless hooks, they worked well. I also almost exclusively used bread this winter over ground bait. That worked well. I think maggots would have caught me fish on 1 or 2 occasions better than bread, maybe more dace, but I think maggots generally bring smaller fish, and I'm quite happy to stick to bread. Back in the summer when I fished the Avon, I seemed to catch on a mixture of tears, bread and maggots. They all worked to varying degrees depending on how much an area was fished. The unfished areas, there were 1 or 2 I found, tears didn't seem to work at all, but in the bits that were fished, it was quite a good response to them. So that's another place I want to explore a bit more. I went for some very long walks on the Avon in the late autumn and found areas I didn't really know about before. So try those, have a look at those next summer, see what happens. I'm glad people are enjoying this series. Like I say, lots more to do on it, and see what we can find next summer. Cheerio for now.